Elon Musk is famous for saying, it's okay to have all your eggs in one basket as long as you control what happens to the basket. Well, I guess the same could be said for your frozen embryos. It's certainly okay to have them in the same basket or cryo tank container as long as you control what happens to that container. But what do you do when you no longer want control of the container? Well, stick around and find out what happens to unused frozen embryos. Hello, I'm Corlandos Scott, an assistant reproduction attorney in Los Angeles, which simply means that my practice revolves around helping people grow their families through assisted reproductive technologies like embryo donation. I have so much to say about today's topic that I'm probably going to have to split it up into 2 episodes. So today we're going to talk about what happens to unused frozen embryos, the effect of freezing the embryos, and what are the available options. Let's do it. For some hopeful parents, having one child through IVF is really all they want. It totally satisfies their family building plans. For others, their quiver is full after 2 kiddos. Count me in that group. It's literally all I can handle. I mean, I love them, but 2 is all I can handle. Well, the thing is, when embryos are created, the clinics don't just create one embryo if, say, the parents only intend to have one child, or 2 embryos if the intended parents plan to have another one after a couple of years. Most hopeful parents who are undergoing IVF for themselves or undertaking a surrogacy journey also end up going for seconds. We call this a sibling journey. So naturally, when they go through the initial IVF process, they fertilize every egg that was retrieved and freeze all of the embryos that they don't use for the initial transfer. And frozen is exactly where they remain. That is, at least until the intended parents have decided what to do next. You may even be wondering what effect freezing embryos has on the quality of the embryo and the likelihood of successfully being able to use the embryo in the future. Well, I'll dig into that in a future episode, but I'll say this. It is true that not all embryos survive the freezing and thawing process. And in the past, maybe distant past, on rare occasions, no embryo survived. Yeah. But we've come a long way with regards to cryopreserving embryos. And over the years, we've seen dramatic improvements in freezing, especially with the newer flash freezing techniques and the newer storage processes. In fact, the newer methods have resulted in high rates of frozen embryo survival and even pregnancy rates that are equal to or higher. Can you believe that? Higher pregnancy rates than fresh transfers. Now, this has led many fertility doctors to move exclusively to what they call freeze-all cycles for couples undergoing IVF. Now, freeze-all cycles are exactly what they sound like. It's when all the embryos in an IVF process are frozen for future use. But what happens if the intended parents have completed their family building journey with embryos remaining in frozen storage, but they no longer wish to go through with another surrogacy or IVF cycle? What happens to unused frozen embryos then? Well, for many, the decision of what to do with unused or remaining embryos after an IVF procedure, successful or not, is probably one of the most difficult decisions. To dispose or not to dispose, to donate or not to donate, to destroy or not to destroy. It's a lot to consider. So let's take a closer look at each available option. But before we do, if you like this video, tell YouTube. I mean, don't talk to your computer or your phone. You tell YouTube by clicking that thumbs up button. Yeah, go ahead and do it. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe and click the little bell so you won't miss any of my upcoming videos. And if you know someone who's looking to grow their family through assisted reproduction, then go ahead and share it with them. It's sort of like embryo donation. You can think of it as a YouTube video donation, and it'll be your good deed for the day. Good on you. So on to your available options. To dispose or not to dispose? That is the question. So disposing in this context simply means using. How do you use the embryos? Well, thankfully, you don't have to run point on this. This is usually done in the lab or the clinic where the embryos are kept or transferred to another clinic or cryobank. So when you start an IVF cycle, clinics provide intended parents with a form. It's usually called a consent form, and it explains your options regarding the future use of your frozen embryos. Now, this is called the disposition of embryos. And let me tell you, it's very important that you read this and do a few things. First, make sure that you and your partner or spouse are on the exact same page with what the disposition language says in the consent form. Listen, don't end up like Sofia Vergara and Nick Loeb, where you're fighting because one of you wants to use the embryos to have additional children, and the other one is like, no, you're not having children with my material because we're not together anymore. Second, make sure that if you use donor eggs or sperm to create the embryo, that there is no clause in your donor agreement that conflicts with the language of the clinic consent form. This brings us to the next option: to donate or not to donate. Unless your embryos were created with donor sperm or eggs that came with a restriction against it, you can probably donate your remaining embryos to another person or couple for them to have a baby, or to a specific organization like Snowflakes. Now, more often than not, egg and sperm donors try to negotiate having a say on this topic. They want to make sure that they have sole discretion when it comes to, we can call it, redonating the embryos created from their genetic material. Many egg and sperm donors that I've represented in the past want to help a specific couple. They want to help you. So they'd rather not you give their genetic material to your best friend or your cousin or your worst enemy. They really want to help one specific couple. Now, another embryo donation option is donating your remaining embryos for medical research. Now, typically this is done through the clinic and not directly by you as the parent. But with this process, you simply need your lab consent forms to allow for it in order to give your lab the ability to donate your embryos to research. Now, this is an awesome way to help further the science that made assisted reproduction for you possible in the first place. One thing to keep in mind with your frozen embryos is that there is a cost associated with keeping them on ice, as we say. So parents typically pay an annual storage fee to the facility that stores their embryos. However, if you decide to donate your embryos to another person, it typically becomes that person's job to cover any subsequent transportation costs or storage costs. Lastly, to destroy or not to destroy. For many parents, when their family building journey is over, they simply destroy the remaining embryos. Well, thankfully, again, you don't have to run point on this. The professionals handle this. Now, this is something, again, that requires your explicit consent before the lab is going to do it. And keep in mind, the process of destruction of embryos has to abide and line up with the rules of each state, so clinics can't just destroy embryos however they want to. Now, I've seen it play out a few different ways. The embryos are typically just thawed and disposed of in a biologically safe manner. I've even heard tales of them being thawed and given to parents for burial. Now, of course, this has to be done in accordance with any applicable state laws. Over the years, there's been a growing issue of people just, I guess you could say, abandoning their embryos. Years pass and the clinics are not able to reach these people anymore. And when this happens, clinics are left with only a couple options. Either refer to the consent form that the parents initially signed, or they just refer to their own policy regarding proper disposition of the embryos. And that's usually just destroy or donate them to research. Or, I guess the other option is just keep them frozen indefinitely and just hope and pray that the parents come back and claim them. Now, this last approach of just keeping them and hoping and praying led one doctor to even bring his cryo tanks home to his garage when he decided to retire. Because the poor guy was afraid to destroy the embryos, he feared a lawsuit. I mean, I get it, but that's just weird. So the moral of the story is, don't leave your lab hanging like that. Be sure to specify exactly what you want to happen to your embryos. Now, I offer my clients a document called a reproductive estate plan that covers all contingencies for what to do with their genetic material in the event of death or divorce or even incapacity. But at the very least, you should let your lab know a few things. The duration you think you may use to store your embryos, what to do with the embryos if something happens to you, what to do with the embryos if you become unable to make a decision, whether or not the embryos are for your exclusive use only, whether or not the embryos may be donated to research, and any other considerations or conditions that you as the parents may have for the use of your embryos. Now, keep in mind, you can still change your mind later on. You can go back and give them updated instructions, but the main thing is give them some instructions to begin with. Now, if you're considering creating embryos to embark on a surrogacy journey, then I have a treat for you. It's a free gift. It's called the Surrogacy Roadmap, and it walks you through each step of the surrogacy process from beginning to end. So if you want it, just click the link below. It'll take you to the surrogacyroadmap.com, and you can get your hands on that valuable resource for free. Well, make sure you come back for part 2 of this topic of what happens to unused embryos, and we'll look at the ethics behind embryo disposition. See you next time.